We're going to get straight on to questions because we run a little short of time, but we're going to just stay until they kick us out. We will. Do we have any volunteers with a mic? I think unfortunately we only have one roving mic, but we'll take as many comments or questions as possible. If I could just ask you, in the interest of allowing as many people to speak as possible, to try and keep your comments and questions as concise as you can, and then we'll try and get speakers to respond at the end.
3 very swift questions, one for James, one for Angela, one for Ken. James, The Economist this week is running a story about post-truth politics, particularly with regard to the alt-right in America and Brexit in the UK. What kind of artillery do you have in mind for social movements such as yourself in response to post-truth politics, something that's not being covered this evening? Angela, what do you think about the representation of women amongst the left recently? MPs like Jess Phillips, Chion Wura has complained about minority female relationships on the left. And then Ken, just finally, you said that Jeremy is opposed to capital, but Brexit, however, was a revolt against transnational global capital, and Jeremy did support the Remain camp. So just a comment on that, please.
I learned today that the children's poet and outspoken socialist Michael Rosen has been kicked out of the Labour Party for apparently being a closet conservative. So he's apparently as a supporter of David Cameron. And my question, though, is there are so many stories like this, and I don't understand why they don't catch. These stories could make for such great works of art, but just in terms of the memes online and young journalists writing about these stories, I don't understand what's stopping them from getting out there.
Yeah, Mark Wadsworth, last time I spoke at a public meeting, Jeremy was there, my old friend from before he was elected in 1983. It made headlines as Smithgate, so you may know me. I think it should be called Smeargate because I was smeared. And out of that debacle, if you like to call it that, I mean, I was immediately expelled from the party for daring to challenge a right-wing Labour MP consorting with the Daily Telegraph. But out of that was something positive. You know, the points that James Snyder has made, and my old friend Greg Philo. The support online from people writing in was overwhelmingly in favour of my stand, from Jewish and non-Jewish people. Pity that wasn't then reflected in the newspapers. But that was a non-story, really. You know, I didn't mention anything to do with Jewish people or anti-Semitism, yet I was called by Ruth Smith a vile anti-Semite in what was effectively a set-up. I was told by George Galloway if it hadn't been me that day, it would have been somebody else. Because the vitriol against Jeremy is just incredible, as we all know in this room, and I was collateral damage. But I just want to say that it was really positive to have all of that support. I am fighting that suspension along with 100 of others. A lot of them are Muslims, by the way, and I hope I can count on all your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Anne, and I'm from the Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom, and we're very pleased to be able to support this meeting this evening. The organisation was formed in the late 70s, early 80s, as a consequence of a massive series of campaigns, not just about media content, but about media ownership. And it's amazing that with the developments that have taken place, that once again there is a big becoming mainstream movement questioning the manipulation and the distortion and the filth that's produced. But there is one thing that every single person in this room can do to really help meld together and mix together the campaign for improved media, better media, media democracy, democratise the press and the media, and also have some influence and effect on the filth and on the ownership. And that is every single person, every media worker bound together in a trade union. Media workers worldwide, historically, are the most progressive of workers and the most powerful of workers, because we organise, we are the manipulators following the orders of our employers. Even if we're self-employed, even if we're casually employed, even if we're employed with no pay either, i.e. internships, we are the purveyors of the filth. And we have a responsibility as workers to try to do something about it. And the only effective way that workers can do something about it is joining their trade union, as well as acting in the community with others in organisations such as are represented here. So I would urge everybody in the room, as well as intensifying efforts with all of these fantastic campaigns that are emerging, is to do your bit by joining either the NUJ or Unite, which represents most of the other workers in IT and in press and media, BECTU, the Musicians' Union, and all other trade unions that are appropriate to the section that you're in. Because that is the way that you can influence other workers. That's the way that you can turn into action some of the demands that are being made. And by developing and organising at the place of work, we can also strike at the heart of the big media monopoly owners, the Murdochs, the Associated Newspapers, the Trinity Mirrors of the world, and the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles and so on. So I implore everybody, show your power, show your strengths, and combine with others by joining the right media trade union. Thank you.
Much. We're really good, and I'm really glad for your list of things to do, Greg. Really helpful. I wanted to make a short comment and a question. Now, in terms of the bias in the media, one clear example was the way that the 44 women MPs who complained about abuse and somehow blamed Jeremy Corbyn for it, that he wasn't doing enough about it, was covered. Well, and also the fact that somehow the first shadow cabinet that had a majority of women was sexist because there wasn't a woman in charge. I mean, that is such an extraordinary thing. The first shadow cabinet that's a majority of women somehow turns out to be sexist. On the other hand, the fact that anti-austerity is the most anti-sexist policy that can be put forward and that has been put forward, given that the austerity cuts have been paid, 85% of them, by women. Something that we hear very little about. So the fact that Jeremy's anti-austerity policy is anti-sexist, we haven't heard too much about. Not from the women MPs and certainly not from the media. So there's another example. Now, I have a question about the media workers' unions. None of you have mentioned them. And the speaker here, the woman who just spoke, said something about that. But what do you think is their role in all this? Because we don't hear a lot about them, frankly. And in fact, some of them have sided straight against Jeremy. And those articles that are written, presumably a number of them are written by union members, the ones that attack Jeremy and the membership.
Thank you to everybody. I just want to add a little bit of things that people can do. I'm on the board of directors of Hacked Off, and 5 years ago we had a very small glimmer of hope where we actually thought we were going to develop a system of press regulation that was independent and would hold them to account. We now are in a position where the previous Secretary of State for Culture and Media and Sport said that he was not minded to bring in the final part of that legislation, Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act, that would actually introduce the costs and incentives that would encourage the press to behave more responsibly. We now have a new Minister for Culture, Media and Sport, Karen Bradley, and she is currently taking consultation advice on what she should do about Section 40. So I would urge every single person here to write to Karen Bradley and say, this is part of a system of press regulation that was voted on unanimously in Parliament, that was agreed by about 70 to 80% of the population, that the powers that be in the press have simply refused to play ball with, and they held, of course, a sword of Damocles over Whittingdale in relation to the scandal that he was involved in at the time. So we need that Section 40 to be enacted, and we need, in order that IPSO, the current press regulator, can actually be shown up for the sham that it is, and that another press regulator can come into place, and those costs and incentives will start. Without that, it really is a kind of one step. If we don't get Section 40 now, it's a hell of a long way to get back to that position. So please write to Karen Bradley, write to your MP, and say Section 40, just commence it. It's already enacted, just needs commencing. Start that process.
Thanks very much for the talk, and more importantly, the education. My name is Munir. I come from Barnett Momentum, or I'm part of Barnett Momentum. I just wanted to make a couple of suggestions, because two of the themes that have come out from tonight is, one, shining a spotlight on the media, and two, underrepresentation of the campaign. As we saw in Sky News yesterday, I think it took over an hour for someone from the Jeremy Corbyn campaign to have a comment. By then I changed over to Champions League football. From those two themes, then I would suggest we look at organization and mobilization, because we talked about 500,000, 600,000 members. And two of the suggestions would be to follow in the shoes of the Calling for Jeremy campaign, because it's been very good in taking a list, creating an app, and allowing people to work from home. So if you want people to complain, call the BBC, read specific articles, then perhaps set up a group of people that can set up something on the computer that will allow people to download at home, that is properly organized, and then people can make an impact, because otherwise it becomes very difficult to just pull together all these ideas to the different parts of the country. The second suggestion is, Ken Loach mentioned that there isn't a discussion on policy in terms of some of the great ideas that have been coming out. And I'd probably say thank goodness for that, because some of these issues are very, very complex. Even to unravel PFI is not something that's easy. So the other suggestion would be to start to get groups of experts in particular areas, I mean experts, not just people who know about these things, who can also be trained, and when it's needed, come in front of the media and argue that position from a technical point of view.
Two things. One is to enforce what has been said about phone banking. I went quite a few times at Unite, and it's quite an experience. First of all, it's led by women. It's something that must be said, okay? Women are running it, okay? Women are running it. They're running the phone bank at Unite. It's important to be said, because we see very, very often the women's role gets completely obscured. And you learn a lot, because you meet a lot of people there, LGBTQ people, black people, straight men, gay men, etc. And you learn, because you learn to speak to people, and people are sometimes very funny, or very weird, or very strange. They don't answer the phone. It's something that you have to learn. And I learned, because I didn't know. And I found it the other thing is this. I think that there is a scope for international connections that have not been drawn. I was very glad that reading Manifesto, I'm Italian, I read Manifesto, there was an interview with Ken Loach, which I thought was very good, and a good start, because this movement is not known all over Europe. It's not known in the United States, okay? And there is a potential for this movement to become a point of reference for international struggle. And we have to think how to influence the media outside the UK and make them realize that this is very important, because my experience is, I'm sorry about this, there is a big difference between the Anglo-Saxon countries and the Mediterranean countries, between the Spanish-speaking people and the English-speaking people. They don't talk to each other. Okay?
Thank you very much.
I think the media has got a hell of a lot worse than this last year. We've seen this incredible slander against Jeremy Corbyn right from the minute he was looking like being leader. And then we've had this huge anti-immigration campaign leading up to Brexit. It's been utterly shocking. And we've got to try and do more. It's not possible to start a new newspaper. It's not possible to start a new TV station. But it is possible to start an online daily newspaper with a media app for mobiles. This is quite possible, and I've been working on it for some months. I've got a colleague now who's willing to put up the funds to start just as a big demo site, which we can get going. We need more help. If anyone's interested in helping, anyone interested in finding out, please give me your email or ask my card. Thank you very much.
Hello, I just have a quick suggestion. I read a lot about message discipline, and I think that is something that we do lack on the left. We have a huge range of views, and I was just thinking perhaps it would be good to create and distribute a toolkit that would help people actually address the key issues and the key policies, and also give people avenues and quick ideas of how to kind of complain and hold the media to account.
Hiya, I've got a couple of questions for James. So when it comes to BBC bias, Ofcom is obviously supposed to be regulating it. Ofcom's supposed to be regulating it. So what do you think is going on, and why do you think it's staying silent? Okay, so when it comes to BBC bias,
I think, yeah, I'll probably have to just translate the question, just if you could just ask it as quickly as possible.
Alright, so when it comes to BBC bias, Ofcom is supposed to regulate it, so what's going on? Why is it staying silent? And have you or Jeremy or Momentum or the campaign at all ever made complaints about Ofcom and what it does? And one other question?
2 seconds.
And also Ken was talking about Jeremy's policy not getting coverage, and I'd like to know what do you imagine those conversations to be like in newsrooms between editors and their reporters when they're saying, no, you should ignore this policy stuff?
What do I imagine?
Yeah, what do you imagine those conversations to be like?
Okay, I'm just going to give whoever wants to, from the platform, to address any of those questions or comments. We've run out of time, but as quickly as possible. Greg?
We did a whole toolkit for all our work on the wealth tax, which is very easily adapted. So if you go onto just Google Glasgow University Media Group, that will take you to our website, and there's quite a big toolkit there with how to actually get messages across, how to organise it. I take your point, and I think we should work on that. But just for the moment, the Media Group website's got a lot on it on that kind of issue. Okay, right. I'll finish.
James, do you want to respond to the question?
Yeah, great toolkit, good idea. That will happen in some form. I'm not an expert on Ofcom. I think maybe Greg would be better to talk about its strengths and failures. What do I imagine newsroom discussions are like? Well, I get told what they're like because not everyone there are people who are more broadly supportive politics who are in newsrooms. Lots of time there's a struggle that goes on. There are discussions, there are people who say we want to do things very much like this. Generally younger people, less well paid, less secure contracts, who are more likely to push back. And I think what I was trying to suggest is how can you strengthen the hand of those people who are in there, who are pushing for things in their news conferences to be better. And I think if we, the more we can build up a constituency that they have to listen to, is that. Just a couple other things that were raised. I'm going to be really fair to Sky for once. The reason why the Corbyn supporter wasn't on for an hour after the debate was logistical rather than editorial, so I'll be fair to them on that. Role of unions, I think what Ken said about democratising media, I think unions can play a massive role in that. And then the first question about post-truth politics. There was never truth politics. There wasn't an era of truth politics where the media was very fair and there weren't any of these difficulties. The difference that we have now, and the reason why we're hearing about this post-truth politics, is because there's a breakdown in confidence in elites and in systemic control. So when we saw in Brexit, during the Brexit debate, who were these experts that people were rejecting? They're the same experts, let's say, from the IMF or OECD or so on, that people do not trust anymore because they've been saying we should have a particular set of economic policies which have failed drastically. Sometimes that has left possibilities and we have to use those, but of course that goes to the right as well, which is why you get the alt-right. Those are the morbid symptoms.
Yeah, just quickly, so to respond to your question about the representation of women on the left, I think that women's experiences, our bodies, everything like that has always been used as a vehicle by the media to push whatever agenda they want to push. So that's my opinion. Nothing that they say is accurate about women, essentially.
Just two things. One is I very much agree that one of the things we need to call out is the mobilisation of the language of anti-oppression by the right as a way to attack the left. And this has really become a thing. And we shouldn't fear it. We shouldn't be intimidated by it, because it is an attempt to intimidate people. We have a very, very strong set of arguments. And the main one is that when you look at Parliament, Jeremy Corbyn has a record of fighting racism, fighting sexism, fighting homophobia, fighting anti-Semitism. That is simply second to none right across that institution, and we need to say that, I think, whenever this comes forward. I mean, just in general, in the spirit of misquoting people, I think the Franklin Roosevelt's comment that something like the main thing we have to fear is fear itself is actually pertinent in this situation. It seems to me there's two ways we can address the problems we face. There's two ways we can think about it. One is, are we simply going to reflect public opinion, see public opinion as static? We just have to, do the opinion polls and follow where people are already at. Or are we going to try and shape it? That's the crucial question, and that's the million-dollar issue here. And it seems to me that, we are in a situation where the combination of a radical political programme with mass participation in movements that include, all sorts of things, including the strike action that's beginning to take place now, including Black Lives Matter, including the anti-war movement, the pro-Palestine movement. If all of these people are participating and mobilised and in some senses linked to the political project around Jeremy Corbyn, given the level of anger and bitterness and alienation that exists in British society at the moment, we have a very good chance of winning, but we can only do it if we have that optimistic, outward-looking, dynamic approach.
I feel bad not saying anything, so I will. We need media strategies, of course. We need progressive media policies. I take it for granted as someone who helped found the Media Reform Coalition. But more than all of that, we need to give voice to the anger and alienation of ordinary people over a range of issues. And that means building the movements which will force themselves onto the stage in such a way that the media will find it very hard to ignore. They may try to ignore them, but our job, in as much as we want to develop the best approach to the media, is to actually build the grassroots and make sure that they explode into the public eye. And I think yesterday I heard some really good reporting. This is a contentious thing to say on this stage. I heard some great reporting on the BBC. Not because anyone had changed their mind, not because they were suddenly doing mea culpas about everything. It was they gave voice to what Jeremy Corbyn said about grammar schools because he annihilated the Prime Minister. He actually represented the views of millions of people. And even the BBC found it impossible to discredit, marginalise or ridicule him because he was speaking what millions of people think. If we then do that over a range of issues, not just about one person doing it, but about deep-rooted campaigns against injustice, against inequality, against austerity, I think that is the single best hope for producing a media reaction that will start to reflect what ordinary people think.
Stand up so that you can see me. Just to answer this gentleman question here and this lady over here, the tour that Justin mentioned earlier, that's Real Media alongside Media Reform Coalition, we're actually launching an app that aggregates independent news from places like Corporate Watch, New Internationalist, Novara Media, and there's also going to be local news in terms of London, Scotland, across cities, and also a place to find events where you can organise in your local areas, and that's going to be launched at the end of next month in the 10-city tour, so that's an option.
Yes, to answer the specific point that you made about the European Union and the campaign to stay in as being a sign that someone favoured capital, the interests of capital, I think it would be shared on the left that the European Union is a neoliberal organisation. It drives to privatisation, it drives to subcontracting and so on. But I think the reasons to stay in, as I understood it, were to maintain solidarity with left groups in Europe, on the one hand, but also because the alternative to leaving was a neoliberal government here, which would again, as investment left, would have to drive down wages and conditions in order to attract the investment that would have left because the companies were no longer had access to the European market. So I think it was a tactical question, and so I don't think it indicates support for the interests of capital. I think the general point that's been made, and I think in many forms, many times tonight, is that how we deal with the media is linked to how we make a successful movement. And that means everyone contributing in their own constituencies, in their own campaigns, in their own communities, organising. And it's carrying out those grassroots campaigning projects. It's talking to people. It's whether we do it door to door, whether we do it in marketplaces, whether we do it in meetings, wherever we do it, whether we do it with phone-ins, whether we do it complaints, in whatever form, but we stay organised, we stay disciplined, we stay and we will become the real force that is already on the way. It's already on the way. I mean, over 500,000 is an extraordinary achievement in the face of this backstabbing and this undermining that's gone on. So I'm really confident for the first time in my very elderly life. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We've run over time. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers, to all of you coming out. Please do go away and act. There is all sorts of events coming up, as we mentioned. There's also a monthly meet-up on the first Tuesday of every month. First Wednesday of every month. We can find the information on meetups.org. There is an incredibly important need for everyone to do, not just to tweet and Facebook and share, but also, as we've heard, pick up the phone to the BBC, write to the Daily Express. Just do it on all fronts. Thank you. Keep the conversation going.